So, nobody really knows how Palau got its first people. For a time, it was just islands sitting in the middle of the Pacific. And at some point, people showed up on them. It can't be magic. So, there's got to be an explanation. Well, studies suggest that today's Palauans are distant relatives of the Malays of Indonesia, the Melanesians of New Guinea, and the Polynesians. But how old are we really talking about here? By carbon dating the artifacts from the Rock Islands and the ancient terraces on Bapeldaub, historians think that civilization started around 1000 BC, maybe even 2500 BC. Though recent discoveries suggest it could go even further than that. So, we don't know for sure. What we do know is this: whoever arrived here first was able to build villages and survive enough to create their own society. And at the centre of their communities, you'd find structures called bai. These are communal gathering houses where practically everything happens, from making decisions to telling stories, and everything in between. That was Palau in a nutshell for thousands of years. It was quiet and isolated. It was its own world. Then in 1783, an English ship called the Antelope wrecked on a reef near a rock island called Oolong. Its captain, Henry Wilson, wasn't really planning to visit Palau. At the time, nobody was. But there he was, stranded. It was Koror's High Chief Ibadul who eventually helped him and his crew rebuild the ship, which, mind you, took over 3 months. After that, Wilson was able to sail home, and when he did, he didn't leave alone. He took Prince Li Bu, the chief's son, with him to England. 6 months after arriving, Li Bu was dead from smallpox. He was probably only a teenager when it happened. From that point on, Palau became an open door, because more explorers came. Then colonial powers followed soon after. In 1885, the Pope stepped in, actually, and formally recognised Spain's claim over the Caroline Islands, which, you guessed it, included Palau. Taking advantage of this, Spain decided to set up churches, introduce the Roman alphabet, and whenever there was a village war, Spain stepped in to stop them. Whether you believe this was a good or bad thing, I think we can all agree that there was some form of progress going on. But Spain didn't hold on for long. By 1899, they sold the Carolines to Germany. The Germans, on the other hand, instead of building on what Spain was doing, they went the opposite direction. They saw the available resources and went after them. Phosphate mining in Anggur, coconut plantations, native labour. In exchange, they left behind certain words to remember them by: bapia for paper, kumi for rubber, senk for money gift. Doesn't matter if they meant to influence Palau's language or not, the case remained. The Germans, one way or the other, infiltrated a piece of the country's culture. Then came World War I. Japan seized Palau from Germany in 1914, and by 1919, the League of Nations made it official. Yet Japan did more than just occupy Palau, they transformed it. Here's what I'm talking about. Koror became the administrative centre for all Japanese territories in the South Pacific, and what had been a small island town turned into a functioning metropolis, full of factories, shops, public baths, restaurants, pharmacies, typical city life establishments. That's when the economy shifted, land ownership shifted, and basically the entire structure of Palauan society shifted. Was it for better or for worse? Well, it depends on who you ask, but the landscape was changed forever. On top of that, the Japanese taught Palauans to carve storyboards, wooden panels illustrating legends and local myths. It was a Japanese artist named Hisakatsu Heiji Kata who got elders to sketch their stories and passed them on to students to replicate on wood. The influence ran so deep, in fact, that Palauan families today still trace roots to different parts of Japan. Then World War II arrived, and that was a whole other thing. See, in 1944, US forces fought to retake Palau from Japan in one of the most controversial campaigns of the entire Pacific War. Yes, I'm talking about the Battle of Pelleo. I mean, it was so controversial that military historians still argue about it to this day. And if you try to join in on the conversation, you realise that it all boils down to one thing: the strategic value. It was, to say the least, questionable. The US military wanted to capture a Japanese airfield to protect their advance on the Philippines, but by the time the dust settled, the airfield wasn't even needed. Because of it, the casualty rate was through the roof. Imagine, it was one of the highest of any amphibious operation in the Pacific, with a massive 40% of the American troops killed or wounded just trying to take the island. After Japan's defeat, Palau passed to the United States as a UN trust territory. The point of this was to build up Palau's infrastructure and education system until the islands could stand on their own. And let me tell you, that took a while. 7 referendums, decades of negotiation. But on October 1st, 1994, Palau signed the Compact of Free Association with the United States and finally became an independent republic. Huzzah! At that time, it was the world's newest nation, and it was a beautiful one at that. So let's talk about it. If you want the quick version, it's 340 islands, 177 square miles, which is about 459 square kilometres of land, and an ocean territory roughly the size of France. That's basically Palau. But you know by now that countries are not that simple to summarise, because tucked into the western edge of Micronesia, neighbouring the Philippines, New Guinea and Guam, this country almost looks like just a random piece of land. You know, a thin chain of islands scattered northeast to southwest across the Pacific. But little do you know, what it lacks in land, it more than makes up for underwater. Okay, so the biggest island here is called Baix Bel Daob. It's about 140 square miles, or 363 square kilometres. And guess what? It makes up about 78% of Palau's entire land area. Isn't that crazy? It's also volcanic, hilly, laced with rivers, and home to Palau's official capital, Ngurulmud. That's a hard word to say. Despite all that though, would you believe me if I told you that this happens to be the least populated capital city in the world? Yeah, it's only got around 400 residents. That's it. Then just south of Baix Bel Daob sits Koror, which used to be the capital. Now it's the place where most of the population lives. Besides those two, you've got the Rock Islands. These are hundreds of mushroom-shaped limestone formations rising out of a turquoise lagoon. Interestingly, their bases are undercut by centuries of waves and chemical erosion until they look like what they look now, floating. Some of these formations tower over 650 feet, which is about 200 metres, while others are barely enough to cast a shadow. Whatever their size is, I just know they're a beautiful sight to see in real life. Just look at this. If you ask me, that's probably a huge reason why UNESCO made it a World Heritage Site in 2012. But it gets better. Because buried inside some of those islands are saltwater lakes, cut off from the ocean, but connected through underground channels. One of them, the Jellyfish Lake, holds millions of nearly stingless golden jellyfish. While they're pretty to look at from afar, you can actually swim with them, which is a totally new experience. Sure, the government limits visits now to protect the ecosystem, but it still remains one of the most surreal things you can do on this earth. So don't miss out. Though beyond the jellyfish, Palau has more species of marine life than any other area of comparable size in the whole world. Ready for the numbers? There are 1,300 species of fish, more than 700 species of coral. Because of this, the government historically designated about 80% of its entire ocean territory as a fully protected marine sanctuary. That means no commercial fishing, no mining, nothing. Which begs the question, how are they making money? So, here's the deal. Ever since World War II, Palau's biggest boss has literally been the government. First it was the US Navy, then a UN trust territory, and now the Palauan government itself. But we know that a government needs money to pay its people. So again I ask, where does the cash come from? Two things, tourism and the US. First, tourism is the lifeblood here, driving 40% of the entire economy and providing a quarter of all jobs. Not only that, but people actually fly into the international airport on Baix Bel Daob from all over the world just to see those untouched coral reefs. Which, by the way, if you're interested in doing so yourself, I'll leave the link to amazing flight deals in the description below. But going back, yes, tourism is a big thing here, though relying entirely on it can be incredibly risky, especially when you're on the front lines of climate change. Not everyone thinks about it, but the rising sea levels and brutal typhoons can actively threaten the very paradise people pay to see. Which is why this second source of income is handy, the United States. Through a geopolitical alliance called the Compact of Free Association, the US handles Palau's military defence and pumps in massive financial grants. They even use the US dollar as their official currency. That's how strong the US Palau ties are. But come on, even with Uncle Sam having your back, Maintaining an island infrastructure is an uphill battle. That's where organisations like the ADB, or Asian Development Bank, step in. We're talking over $221 million committed to Palau for huge public projects. For instance, remember those gorgeous beaches scattered around the country? Well, to keep them pristine, the ADB recently threw millions into rehabilitating the sewerage network in Koror to stop waste from polluting the sea. They're also funding lower interest loans for clean energy and climate-resilient projects, ensuring local and women-led businesses can literally keep the lights on when disaster strikes. Meanwhile, if you venture outside the main hub of Koror, you'll find yourself in a completely different economy. Rather than a modern lifestyle, you'll see a traditional subsistence lifestyle come to life. I'm talking women cultivating taro and sweet potato, while men fish the nearshore reefs to supply customary feasts. So when you look at both angles side by side, it really is a beautiful contrast. You've got the high-end global tourism on one side, and ancient self-reliance on the other. Between the two, let's talk about the second one for a minute, because if there's anything that defines Palau culture, it's conservation. In this country, saving the planet is an ancestral inheritance, because long before marine biology was a field of study, Palauans practiced something called bul. That's a traditional decree by the village chiefs to completely freeze the use of natural resources, like a reef or a forest, to allow it to regenerate. Therefore, when modern Palau became a global trailblazer by banning mass-market tourism, creating the world's first shark sanctuary, and outlawing reef-toxic sunscreens, they really weren't trying to invent new laws. That's just their way of scaling up the bul. And this mindset is so intense that Palau became the first nation on Earth to alter its official immigration laws for ecology, meaning when you land at the airport, the customs officer won't give you the generic ink stamp. You'll get the Palau Pledge stamped directly into your passport. It's a mandatory, legally binding promise written to the youth of the country that every tourist must sign, promising to act kindly and tread lightly for the sake of the children of Palau. And you might be wondering, why are they fighting so hard? Why are they taking this, well, some might say, way too seriously? Well, to answer your question, for Palauans, the environment isn't a commodity. It's a relative. Traditionally, the land and the shallow taro patches were the sacred domain of women, while the open, unpredictable ocean belonged to the men. So to feed the village, Palauan men had to master the currents, read the phases of the moon, and build sleek outrigger canoes. As you can see, the sea was their livelihood, so if the ocean dies, the Palauan identity dies with it. And that's the last thing we want to happen, right? And if you ask me, that shouldn't just apply to Palau. It's a wake-up call for the rest of us. So let's talk down in the comments. What's one tiny habit you can change starting today to help protect the environment? And while you're down there, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.